So I'd like to reflect a little on why mindfulness is considered to be a spiritual power. Mindfulness is the embarkation point of a path. This is where many of us begin. It's the point where we begin to walk a path, have a sense of direction, rooted in aspirations, rooted in values. For anything to change at all, mindfulness is needed. It is central to the process of awakening, central to the process of transformation. In my understanding, this word sati, which we translate as mindfulness, is the most frequently used word in the early discourses. It gives a sense of why it is given so much significance to be awake, to be present. Probably the more accurate translation of this word sati is a present moment recollection. It has connotations of remembering. And in this case, as the Buddha used the word mindfulness or sati, what was being remembered was not historical events, but remembering this present moment experience. I personally think of this remembering as a wider landscape, remembering what we value, remembering the teaching, remembering the direction, remembering our own aspirations. The best way of understanding sati or mindfulness is through some of the similes that we find woven into the early teachings. And when we look at these similes and the images that are used, we understand what a finely nuanced word sati is. That there's no one word that captures it. And this is something that the early translators struggled with, to find one word that captured this spectrum of nuance that is held within this word sati. So the early translators borrowed this word mindfulness from the Gospels. I'd like to touch on some of these similes, some of these images, and the reason why it is important to know these nuances or these different aspects of mindfulness is that because in different moments of experience in our life, it might be helpful to foreground one of these aspects of mindfulness over the others. If I'm in a place of being very confused, muddled, it might be helpful to draw on this aspect of mindfulness which is concerned with investigation. If I'm feeling very overwhelmed by impulse or by habit patterns, it might in that moment be helpful for me to draw upon this element of mindfulness, which is more about being protected, protective awareness. If I was to find myself in the midst of feeling very contracted, very closed down, it might be helpful for me to draw upon the aspect of mindfulness that is more concerned with spaciousness, with holding a big picture, with not seizing upon particulars or details, a more inclusive awareness. So some of these images or some of these similes you might be familiar with. The Buddha speaks about sati, or likens sati to a person standing on a watchtower, on an elevated watchtower, and having an overview of the panorama that surrounds them, that they are in the midst of, without seizing upon any particular aspect of that panorama. So it gives a sense of this spaciousness, this inclusivity, the non-preferential awareness. Another of the images that is used is the image of a parent cradling their sick or ailing child with tenderness and care. And this particular simile, or this image, really speaks to the qualitative tone of mindfulness. This sense of befriending, of being a friend to, of caring. It is found very much also in the teaching of metta, of boundless friendliness, which the Buddha actually names as a sati, of mindfulness. Another of the images that is used is of a farmer plowing a field, something I mentioned before, knowing just the right amount of weight and pressure to put upon the plow if the seeds were to thrive. Another, I think, of the very powerful images is the gatekeeper, a wise gatekeeper, standing at the gates of a city. And the role or the job of the gatekeeper is to welcome in all of the visitors who intend to serve the well-being of the city and its inhabitants, and recognizing, but not entertaining, the visitors who turn up at the gates, who seek to undermine the well-being of the city and its inhabitants. This element of sati, or mindfulness, as protective awareness, is really drawing upon something we've already spoken about, this quality of discernment, of knowing what is helpful and what is unhelpful, what to feed and to nourish, and what not to entertain. It draws upon that discernment that says, these visitors will lead to the end of affliction. These visitors will lead to the furthering of affliction. And I think many of us learn in the development of mindfulness how to be the wise gatekeeper of our own hearts and minds, knowing what to welcome and to nourish and foster, and knowing what not to welcome. This element of discernment is the bridge between seeing and responding. Without this element of discernment, mindfulness can become something very passive, of just watching, just observing. So discernment in that sense is really drawing virya into the foreground, drawing action, response, energy into the foreground. This discernment that knows how to acknowledge something, but not to welcome it. This is not a defensive mindfulness. It is a protective mindfulness. And there's a huge difference between those two words. Defensive awareness does not want to see something, where a protective awareness is quite willing and knows it's needed to acknowledge and see what is present, but has a discernment that they don't need to feed it, knowing that whatever we feed will grow. There's an image which is quite important. The image that is used is of a surgeon. And someone comes to the surgeon having been wounded by an arrow and looking for help from the surgeon. And a good surgeon is not immediately going to bring out an instrument to amputate their arm. A good surgeon is going to probe the wound in order to palpate the wound, in order to ascertain the nature of the wound, in order to make a diagnosis and to be able to offer a prognosis, a course of treatment. This is the job of mindfulness. This is the work of mindfulness that investigates, that palpates experience, to know what is actually happening, to know what is needed, to know the prognosis, and to be able to respond appropriately. One of the images that is used in portraying this mindfulness field is of a person trying to extricate themselves from a thicket of thorns. And if you've ever been caught in a thicket of thorns, you know that the very worst thing you can do is to try and yank yourself out of it. That you might have to carefully get the thorns out of your clothing so as not to rip your clothing or rip your skin. And it describes this element of sati, which is really about carefulness, attention to detail, circumspection, in order to extricate ourselves from these cycles of reactivity and these patterns of creating distress. I think another of the important images is the image of a person walking through a crowded marketplace, carrying on their heads a bowl of oil and being followed by someone with a sword who threatens to cut off their head should any of the oil be spilt. It sounds a rather ominous image, but I think it really describes the carefulness and the mindfulness we need as we navigate our way through this world. That we're grounded in the body, rooted in the body, present wholeheartedly within the body of the moment as that body moves through a world of conditions, a world of events, and a world of experiences. Another of the images that is used is of a strong post hammered into the ground, and to the post are tied 6 wild animals on leads. And the 6 wild animals represent the 5 traditional sense doors and the sense door of the mind. And the strong post in the ground, it represents mindfulness or sati. And these wild animals on the end of the leads are intent on escape, intent on foraging through familiar pathways, heedless of what they are doing. And so in this image, the post, the mindfulness that is anchoring these wild animals until they begin to quiet and soften and tame, represents an element of mindfulness which is really concerned with restraint. Knowing the habit patterns, the reactions that don't serve us well, knowing when they arise, and knowing that we don't have to enact all of those habit patterns in every moment, that we may have choices to begin to calm those patterns of reactivity, those impulses, those compulsions, in a way that is skillful and caring. Another of the images that I think is important is a person herding their cows. That a good cow herder knows when the crops are growing in the fields and just beginning to grow, it's not a good plan to allow their cows to wander through those fields of sprouting crops. So again, they collect and they gather their cows together and keep them where they're nourished and where they're safe. But the same cow herder in another moment may be in a time when the crops have been harvested, and the cow herder can sit back under the tree, spacious, relaxed, and allow their cows to roam in the fields, knowing that they will do no harm.